Welcome. I'm Rebecca Snyder. I'm the Executive Director of MDDC Press Association, and I am delighted to have everyone here for our second session in, maybe really it's the third session in our Into the Newsroom series. Today we have Graham Cullen, who is an editor at the Frederick News-Post and a photographer extraordinaire, and an adjunct lecturer at the University of Maryland in digital photography. And he is going to cram a ton of information into our half-hour slot. We'll reserve the last 15 minutes for questions and to discuss different issues. We're also joined by Tom Linthicum, who is the MDDC Foundation Board President, and sort of our shepherd of some of our interns. He makes sure that we're checking in and making sure everyone's time is going smoothly. Before we get started and I hand it over to Graham, I just wanted to kind of go around the horn and ask everyone to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started. So I'll call on people based on where I see them in my grid. So Tom, did you want to say hi? You're muted. Let me unmute. Now you're unmuted.
Now I'm unmuted. Okay. So, hi everybody. Thanks for being here. It's good to see you. We appreciate, Graham, especially you're doing this for us, and we look forward to a good morning of learning.
Terrific. Rob Roberts?
Yes. Hello.
And where are you from? Can you tell us?
I'm from Washington, D.C. originally, living in Silver Spring, Maryland at the moment.
Terrific. And are you writing or working with a publication at this point?
Yes, I'm a photographer for the Washington Informer newspaper.
Oh, terrific. We'll be working with Denise a little bit later today on an ad tax that DC is working on. So glad you're here. Jack, do you want to introduce yourself? You're on mute now. There.
Hi, my name's Jack. I'm an intern with the Capital Gazette, and I'm a former student of Graham's.
Oh, no pressure. Okay. Carolyn?
Hi, I'm Carolyn. I'm from Southern Maryland, and I'm here from the Baltimore Jewish Times.
Terrific. Sela?
Hi, I'm Selamaya. I'm the editor of the Baltimore Jewish Times, and I've got like the whole team here with me today.
Terrific. Good. And congratulations on your new role.
Oh, thank you.
Jesse?
Hi, I'm Jesse Berman. I'm in near Baltimore, Maryland. I'm also with the Jewish Times and looking forward to the class.
Perfect. Yakira?
Hi, I'm Yakira. I'm interning for the Baltimore Jewish Times this summer, and I'm a rising senior at the University of Maryland.
Terrific. Okay. Bill?
Hi, I'm Bill Rogers. I'm director of the South Carolina Press Association, and this sounded like such a good idea, I wanted to watch it. I'm also a photographer, worked as a photographer at the Nashville, North Carolina paper.
Perfect. Well, I'm fostering kittens, so I'm hoping to pick up some great photo tips as well. So I feel like we can all use it. Lily?
Hey, I'm a reporter with the Capital Annapolis.
Terrific. And Dorothy?
Hi, I'm Dorothy Boulware. I'm the managing editor for the Afro-American newspaper.
Perfect. Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Thomas? Thomas, you're on mute. All right, maybe he's stepped away. So just in the interest of transparency, we do record this session. And it will be available. I'll send it out, the link out through the Friday Planner, and it will be on our YouTube channel along with our previous sessions in this series, interviewing and building rapport, and then getting to know your beat are already uploaded, and this will be up later today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Graham. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, so if you have questions or whatnot, either pop in and ask or put them in the chat and we'll take care of them. So thank you, and over to you, Graham.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen and might take me a second because Zoom likes to hide my cursor as soon as I go full screen with this, so bear with me. All right. Okay. So like we said before, I'm going to sort of burn through a lot of material real quick, and thankfully, because it's being recorded, you can always go back. So some of the basics that we're going to go over, phone camera basics, we'll talk about portraits, finding quality light, which is critical for strong photojournalism, framing, backgrounds, and then some other just sort of design and photography principles to sort of be aware of. But first and foremost, and I cannot stress this enough, if you're using your phone for photojournal or for photo in the workplace, or even just making selfies and things like that, clean your lens. Most people probably don't even think twice about this. You pull your phone out of your pocket, and so this is me after I just took it across my shirt. You know, you don't need any special microfiber cloth or anything like that. This is what my phone looked like right before I did that, right? So like even a little thumbprint, a little smudge of your finger across the lens is going to make your photos less sharp. So be sure, especially if you're on an assignment and you're using your phone, you know, we always say the best camera is the one that you have with you. So if you don't have a DSLR or something like that, even your phone obviously is going to be better than nothing. And certainly in a lot of instances, you can sort of put yourself in a position where you're a little less conspicuous when you're just using a phone. So backgrounds. The biggest consideration to think of with photographing a subject is to keep prominent lines like trees or horizon lines or buildings, any strong prominent line from intersecting with the person's head. So in this photo that you're seeing here of my daughter from several years ago, I wouldn't want to put like a street or a fence, you know, so like it means actually bringing the camera down or crouching. Forgot there's a little video element to this one, right? And so like getting down a little bit lower, using the sky as a background can really help. Here, this wouldn't be ideal because it makes it look as if the tree is actually sort of sprouting out of her head. So, all right, we'll move on. So a couple more little basics, because a lot of people, you know, you unlock the phone camera and just fire away. There's a lot of little tricks that you can use to make your photos a little bit better. If the phone isn't automatically focusing on your subject's face, just tap right there to make sure that it's focusing on the right spot. Do not use filters. If you're doing anything for photojournalism, we want the straight image out of the camera. Make it look right the first time. Don't use like retro filters and things like that. You could get away with it if you were doing like a feature type piece, but ideally you should not be using filters. The new iPhones, for example, have that portrait mode where it throws things out of the background out of focus. Looks very nice, but what you're actually doing is taking an image from the two different cameras and compressing them into one. And you know, that is essentially a photo illustration. And trust in journalism is obviously the most important thing we have going for us. And by combining photos, even in a built-in environment like the Apple Portrait mode, that's to be avoided. Make sure that you're focused on the face. Turn off the flash and the HDR. HDR stands for high dynamic range. What that's going to do is make 3 separate images and combine them. So it's going to take the highlights and bring them down so that they're not like a sky, for instance, isn't pure white, and a shadow isn't just pure black. It's going to make everything look a little bit better. But again, that's taking multiple images and combining them into one. It doesn't necessarily look the way that it would coming out of a straight camera. The flash, first of all, the flash is so anemic on the phone that unless it's a dark ballroom or something, it's not going to do anything anyway. The only effect it's going to have is basically slow down the amount of time it takes from when you press the shutter to actually actuate and get the picture. And use a contrasting background. So if you have someone with red, like a reddish sweater on or something like that, probably don't want to put them in front of, say, a brick wall for a photo because they're going to get lost. Look for contrasting, different brightnesses, different colors, and things like that when you're trying to. There we go. All right, more on to sort of the editorial side of things. For news photography, you can't really do this job properly from the fringes, from the back of the room. You've got to put yourself right up front. You've got to be there, right up front and center to capture these types of moments. Also look for fleeting moments. That's one of the biggest things that I can recommend is, don't just document the scene. Get that safe shot first, but then try to anticipate moments before they happen. If there's going to be some conflict, that's what you're looking for, is that moment that was there for just an instant and then it's gone. So back to sort of design principles or photography principles, contrast. There's a couple different types of contrast for photography. The biggest one that we think of is in light, but then there's also color contrast, sort of what I was talking about with the photographing someone against a brick wall, right? So you wouldn't want to have like the same color schemes in the background and foreground. And then not as many people think about this, but there's also contrast in action. And so kind of what's happening in the image. So in light, here we have, for example, cell phone light illuminating this young lady's face while everyone else is illuminated by a red, darker light. For images like this, having control of your exposure, be it on a DSLR or on a camera phone, is very important. All of the examples that I'm showing you were all made with DSLRs. I am a professional photographer, so if I can get away with not having to use my phone on an assignment, obviously I don't. But even with a camera phone, you can achieve really interesting dynamic light, dynamically lit photos, even with a camera phone. It just means tapping on the screen and then that little sun icon that you see, drag it down or up to make it brighter or darker. So contrast in action. So here, for example, this one person stands out just because it's a completely different action from the rest of the field. Looking for pattern in your scenes is important, and eliminating anything else in the image that would be distracting. So in this particular scene, this field of lavender, there's also trees and a bunch of other people and things like that, but positioning oneself so that you can capture these quiet little moments, but with pattern, right? So like this image of a woman bending down to get flour wouldn't be nearly as aesthetically pleasing or interesting had I not captured it in a way that depicts the pattern of the field. So big thing, find the quality light. So the brightest light source that's available, be it the sun, be it just window, a desk lamp, things like that. The larger the light source, the softer the light. So if you're talking about a big pane window at the front of a store, for example, you've got lots of natural light coming in. If you're talking about, say, the flash on your phone, that's a very, very tiny light source. And the harsher the light will look, the smaller that light is. So big open windows with natural light coming through look really, really nice. You basically don't want to fight with the light, right? So if you put the dominant light behind you, and so that's on your subject, that's going to look better than if the dominant light is behind them. North window light, which I'll show you an example of a little bit later, is fantastic for portraits. And again, I'll describe that a little bit more in depth. Golden hour. Golden hour is the first and last hour of sunlight in the day. So when the sun is lowest in the sky, that light that's coming through the atmosphere is warmed up, warm as in the color temperature, and you get these golden sort of orangish hues, sort of like if you imagine someone being lit by a single candle. It's that orange light as opposed to midday sun, which is what we can, widely consider to be like white light. That light is also really nice because it's coming in at a steep angle. It's filling in shadows on people's faces as well, and it makes for really, really flattering light. It's not really our job to make people look good, but it certainly helps to make images that stand out and will attract someone's attention. And speaking of midday sun, avoid it whenever possible. For a lot of reasons, it creates really harsh shadows. People's eyes end up having these black discs in them. If someone is wearing a baseball cap, it puts a shadow across pretty much their entire face. And it's just really, really unattractive light in most cases. All right, so portraits. Two main considerations. One, and most importantly, is finding that quality light. Direct sunlight, unless it's like evening light where it's coming in at a shallow angle, is going to be much better than that midday sun. If someone's in like a shadow or something like that, making sure that you have nice even light across someone's face, right? So you don't want them standing half in a shadow and half in direct sunlight, because then the camera is just going to give you, either overexposed or underexposed portion of your photo. The second consideration is your background, also very, very important. And with portraits, we often talk about making what we refer to as environmental portraits, something that says something about the person, or like their environment or where they work, what they do, things like that. Sometimes, there's not a whole lot you can do to sort of illustrate the person's job, because frankly, portraits of a person behind a computer are generally a little bit more boring to look at. So what I'm often looking for are interesting patterns. I'm looking for interesting architectural features to highlight. So in the photo on the left, for example, they have these really interesting lights on the wall that make this grid. And it's important to frame the person between those dominant elements so that there's a little bit of breathing room, as it were, for your eye. The other thing with portraits that often gets overlooked is vary your perspective, right? So like how you're looking at the person, like your vantage point. There are very few instances where I'm making a portrait and I am sitting at eye level with the person and just making it like that. There's a couple reasons. One, when you're standing at the same level as the person, when you're looking behind them, the background is often going to include a horizon line, and the horizon line is going to basically cut through their head. So if you get a little bit lower, you can use a bright blue sky as your backgrounds, or you can use a blank wall, something like that. And it just looks a little bit more interesting if you're looking slightly up at the person or slightly down. So the one on the right, for instance, I'm looking slightly down at the person, and she's looking up. Another consideration, I rarely will have someone look directly at me where their body is square to the camera. There are certain instances where that does work, where it does work well. That said, I will generally have someone turn their body like to a 45-degree angle and then just say, okay, look at me. And then they'll look, and you get a little bit more tension. It's a less standoffish type photo. And again, as with many art principles and things like that, a lot of these rules can be broken, right? There's no rule that really can't be broken. But knowing these principles will help you decide how best to make a picture. Another consideration, and I've sort of got it illustrated here in this this one on the left. It's called the rule of thirds. So if you imagine breaking your image into thirds, both horizontally and vertically, you want to put your subject, if you've got like a wide angle type image like this one on the left, you don't want them directly in the middle. You want them off to one side or the other. It's perfectly up to you to decide, whether you want them looking into the frame, sort of out of the frame. Generally, we like to see people looking into a frame. But just imagine two lines going down, dividing the image into thirds that way, and then same on the vertical. And you want to also try to have, if you have a horizon line, have that horizon line either on the bottom third line or the top third line. And it sort of depends on your scenario as to kind of what would work best. So coming back to north window light. So north window light is different than east and west, and especially in the northern hemisphere, than even south light. Because the sun, of course, rises in the east and sets in the west, that light, when it comes through a window, is going to be direct sunlight. Direct sunlight has a different look and feel than does indirect light. Now, a window that is facing the north, all of the light that's coming in is reflected light. So all of the light in the sky has a much more diffuse look. And so this image, for example, it's just a single normal window light, just happens to be pointing north, and it creates a really nice soft light. A quick tip, if you're making portraits using this, get the person closer as close as you can to the window without actually showing the person like in the window frame. The further you get away from that window, the more that light drops off. So tapping on, if you're using a camera phone, tapping on your screen and bringing down the exposure, always try to expose for the person's face. In this case, this chef's uniform, for example, doesn't bother me at all that the white is sort of blown out. It's white, whatever. But again, this image, you'll notice I'm looking slightly down. I'm 6'2" as it is, so like I don't have to, do the old Hail Mary as often. But again, having that person face or turn their body toward the window or toward the light source, and then look back slightly at you, and it creates just a nice little visual tension that's can be very arresting. So backgrounds, we talked about this before. Having sort of clean backgrounds is important. In this case, textured background. This particular portrait was made in a community room with a whole bunch of paintings on the back wall. There were stacks of chairs and tables and things like that. Not really conducive to a great environmental portrait. However, the floor has this really interesting textured, checkered paneling. So this is me standing on a chair, looking down. There are sort of behind me and to the to camera right, big pane windows that are letting in nice, soft, indirect light. And here's one of those images where I am putting the person directly in the middle, and they are square to the camera, and they're just completely engaged. And so again, a lot of these principles can be broken in certain situations. Another thing people will often ask is, what do I do with my hands? Right? There's that funny scene with Will Ferrell in the movie Talladega Nights where he's asking the person, what do I do with my hands? And his hands just kind of come up into the screen. It's a very, very common thing. People don't know how they should position themselves. The first thing you always say is whatever makes you comfortable. If that means holding your hands, putting your hands behind your back, resting them, folding them, whatever. I let them make a decision first, and then I might suggest, hey, why don't you try this? So in this case, what I was trying to avoid were those distracting elements in the background. Everything you leave in an image is something that you're telling your viewer to look at, right? So if I'm leaving something in the frame, I'm expecting that, okay, if there's a toy truck or something, just something random in the background, that's going to be one more element that someone's going to be scanning the image, looking for balance, looking for the things that they should be noticing. So I'm trying to eliminate all those things and just focus on my portrait subject. Here, for example, this cattle farmer, I broke my own rule about contrasting colors with his shirt, but I didn't want to have the background for this be grass. I wanted to show the cattle, and the sky was just a much more clean background. So for this image, making a portrait of a cattle farmer can't really do justice without actually showing some of the cattle. So finding those things that are relevant to the story and including them in the background, very, very important. And again, play around with the angle, right? So like I said, rarely am I making a portrait where I'm just standing in front of the person. That is, except for when I'm making just standard headshots. If I'm making a standard headshot, then I'm generally going to be shooting straight at them. So golden hour. We talked about this a little bit before. So this particular image is one beam of light right before sunset that's cutting through like a tree line, and it just so happens that one beam of light is on a sidewalk, and the people on either side of this woman end up being in the shadows while she sort of stands out. You'll see how it produces that really, really lovely golden hue. And that's something that you wouldn't go in and use, for example, Photoshop to have that effect on someone where you photograph them in the middle of the day. I like to tell my students, and Jack can attest to this, Photoshop is not to be used as a verb. So the further we can get away from people's perception that we Photoshop things, the better. And you should be aiming to make pictures look the right way in the camera and not using software. So here's an example of midday sun. So the one on the left does not have a flash. It's just straight exposure. And you see how we've got those shadows across the eyes, shadows across cheeks. And it's not a very flattering look. The one on the right, same exposure, but with flash, a camera flash fired to sort of fill in those shadows. We call that fill flash. It's just supposed to be filling in the shadows on the face. It's not designed to overpower the sun. But again, that's going to require a DSLR or now mirrorless camera, something like that. The flash on your phone cannot compete with the sun. So framing. Framing mostly has to do with considerations of what's in your background. But it can also be images that are, or elements that are in your foreground as well. So you have to be thinking spatially when you're making pictures, because imagine this image with just a straight black background. It's far less interesting. It's much more interesting to contain the central portion of your image within some other element, whether or not it's in the background or foreground. So first off, a lot of people think, oh, well, I'll just make a picture from wherever and then I'll crop it later. I will admit that on 99% of the photos that I make, I do some amount of cropping. Usually it's not a drastic type of cropping, but there is almost always some amount of cropping. That said, it's much better to frame it right the first time. And, you know, I'm sure most people are familiar with when you're using your camera phone, you can just pinch out, right, to enlarge and to zoom in. The problem with that is when you do that, all you're doing is cropping your image and you're losing image data. So it's much better to, as we say, zoom with your feet. So just get closer, frame it right the first time, and try to fill the frame as much as possible. So imagine you're looking through the viewfinder or you're looking on your camera. Imagine that is the image that you're going to post, right? Like there's, you know, just try to give yourself that limitation of saying, well, I can't do any drastic croppings to this. So, you know, how close do I have to get to make this picture look nice? I will say that this image, what I was looking for here was something different than I ended up getting. So here, this is the photo that we actually ended up running. This was pretty early in my career. And you'll notice, again, one of the things that I sort of lost sight of with this, it was a very quick moment. The guy happened to like look over his shoulder toward the sun as it was setting, really lovely light. But you'll notice the tent in the background, the person, the other horse, the telephone line poles, things like that. There's a lot there that's distracting off to the right. And then at the bottom right, you have this large swath of what we call negative space, where there's the balance of this photo is really off. And so looking at these two images, you can see the one at the left is much stronger, and it was simply because of the framing. So image depth, this kind of goes hand in hand with framing. Looking for multiple relevant elements to include in one frame. You could go around and notice a lot of little details and say, oh, here's a bunch of flowers, click. Here's a person handing flowers, click. Here's the sign with the logo or something like that. Trying to find a way that you can combine those elements in one makes your images much stronger. So in this case, I could get a picture of these workers or these church parishioners waving to people as they come through. What I really want is to be able to add some context to the image, right? You want to be able to read something from the photo. And this being a Mother's Day, distribution of flowers, what I'm looking for is, to combine that element of the Mother's Day sign with the nice scripty, design, along with the flowers and some action of the person waving, right? So I call that the visual verb. You want to be looking for someone who is doing something. And so in this case, we're combining 3 different elements into one frame. So even, especially now, of course, with the pandemic, one of the things that I preach the most in my classes to students is to get close, right? Your images get better when you get close. that's really not as safe now, right? And of course, our subjects themselves, in many cases, are distancing themselves. So to be able to put multiple people in a frame, if they're sitting, two people are sitting like this, if you're standing right in front of them, you have a large gap in between them. However, if I rotate myself around, I can combine two people into one frame, and you can create some depth. Now, some people will invariably complain or note that, well, you're making it look as if they're closer than they are, and you're distorting the truth. More and more people are becoming more visually literate, right? They understand and are a little more familiar with the photographic vernacular of, sort of compressing a frame and, forced perspective. You're hearing more and more things like that. But really, it's about finding multiple elements that you can combine into one image. There's nothing, unless you're literally lying in the caption and saying, that these people are sitting, only a foot apart, which clearly isn't the case. It's fine to be making an image like this. But the big thing is finding multiple relevant elements to combine into one image. And it's all about roaming the room and finding the right angle. Same thing here. We have this barbershop, 3 different people. There's only one spot where I can make an image and get all 3 people and not have it be also just a lot of negative space. So ideally, you want to have multiple elements in an image for the eye to scan, right? So like you look at this and say, well, what's the first thing that someone looks at? First thing that they're going to look at is probably the 2 people at the left, mostly because they are closer and larger, but also because that's where I put the focus. Had I put the focus on the people in the back, the eye probably would have gone there first. But try to get faces, try to get eyes. Eyes are the first thing people look at when they're looking at an image. And so make sure you're not just getting people from behind. You've got to put yourself, again, front and center. All right, so a little bit of basics of editing on the phone, because obviously, especially now with as many protests as we're covering, we're having to file in the field more and more. Now, even if you're shooting with a DSLR, there are cables and Wi-Fi in some cameras that will allow you to get a full resolution image to your phone. But even if you're just using your phone for photography, Apple and Android phones now shoot in a RAW format, which allows for much more high quality images. But while you should be trying to make the image right the first time when you hit that shutter button, there's always a little bit that you can do to elevate the image. Maybe it needs to be brightened a little bit, which is usually the case, right? You can't really change anything about the exposure or where people are in a photo, but you can adjust, for example, the exposure. So when you're in your photo camera roll, for example, and I have an iPhone, obviously, so I can't speak entirely to the Android process, but I know that it's very, very similar. Hit edit, the little dial looking icon at the bottom, that's your editing settings. And then you've got brilliance, exposure, highlights, shadows, contrasts, brightness, and black point, among several other color functions as well. The biggest one here is the exposure one. Once you click on that, you'll then have a slider that allows you to go left or right to brighten or darken the image. Don't go wild with it. This should really only be used for minor adjustments. But contrast, and I find black point very useful as well, because that's going to take the darkest part of your frame and you're telling it, okay, this should actually be black. Whereas it might be a little bit too bright. You can drag that down and make what should look to the normal eye to be black, it'll make it look black. Another thing, which you can of course do in the camera, is crop. So two icons to the left of the exposure settings, you've got those intersecting red angles. That's the sort of universal crop icon. So you tap on that, and then you it may try to auto rotate a little bit. You can undo that. But so for instance, with this photo, just a photo of a bunch of seedlings from my garden, I don't want to show the edge of that little basin that I've got. So I want to crop that out and really highlight that focal point. You can rotate to correct for, excuse me, to correct for some error that you had. You know, you might have had the camera slightly askew like this, and so you can go ahead and rotate it back, which, you know, occasionally you do have to do. Transmitting files. So here's the thing. While you can post them to Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, the problem is all of those services are going to compress your file. So while someone obviously can take that out, if you're in the print business, you know, if you expect that photo to run 5 columns, you've got to have the original image. You can't be taking something off of social media. So if, for example, you're trying to get it back to your newsroom, when you go to email a photo, you'll get these options of the actual size, large, medium, and small. You should be aiming to have it be around 1 or 2 megabytes. If it's over 3 for the actual size, go down to the large one. A 1 megabyte file is going to suffice. Anything that gets down into the hundreds, especially low hundreds or tens of kilobytes, is going to be too small for print, unless you're talking about just a small little headshot. But if you're talking about a general news photo, you should be looking for something in the neighborhood of 1 to 2 megabytes. All right. Do we have any questions? I want to open it up, and I can sort of answer basic questions.
Graham, that was such an awful lot of information. I feel like I was scribbling notes throughout the whole piece. I think it's if there's like one major takeaway from this session, what would it be for someone who's maybe more on the editorial side and taking pictures as they go? What would be the tip that you want to make sure they remember?
Get as close as you can safely get to the news, and look for moments, look for nice light. The design principles hopefully, over time sort of become innate. But what you're really, what we do is we get close to the news. And now we have obviously extra considerations, not just for our own safety, but for that of our subjects. But, putting yourself as close to the action as you can is probably the most important thing to keep in mind.
Terrific. Any other questions for Graham? All right. Well, I see that we're at 10:16. Tom, did you want to bring up any questions or any comments geared more towards our interns, or are you feeling good?
I'm actually feeling pretty good. I've been in touch with the MDDC interns this week and kind of know what's up with them. And a couple of them have sent me questions. And today, I think the focus, no pun intended, was just on photography. And I'm with you, Rebecca. I took a ton of notes here. So I'm sure this is going to be valuable for people to go back over with the recording. But I think for now we're good.
Terrific. Well, then, before we all start to pop off, let me thank Graham for his time and expertise. It was invaluable. And let me also plug our next session, which is going to be the 29th of July with Brian Sears of the Daily Record. And he's going to be talking about how to pry PIA and public records loose from custodians who maybe aren't as invested as they could be in getting those out to the population. So again, that's another free webinar as part of our Into the Newsroom series. Thank you all so much for coming, and look for the link to this recording in Friday's planner. So thank you so much.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Have a great week.
Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you.
Thank you.